The argument that it's not good science takes a different tack from this more fundamental argument that it's morally wrong regardless. It almost distracts us from that argument. If you see what I mean, like we're just saying it's
Yes.
wrong. Like it doesn't matter whether it's bad science, and then we get into an argument about whether it's bad science. So, so what are your messaging suggestions for the non-scientists, the people who aren't that familiar with the issue, but would like to have a conversation or get dragged into a conversation when people find out you're an animal advocate?
Absolutely. And I absolutely understand what you're saying, Mariann. And I think it's a really important point. So you're right. Like Rise for Animals, we would oppose animal research, even if it was translating for humans, because we feel that it's unethical. But we are fortunate, or our cause is fortunate in the sense that the science just doesn't back it up. And again, that does come from folks in that particular realm. But I think what's important for people to understand before we get bogged down in an argument over science, because you're right, we're not, as advocates and non-scientists, we're not going to win that one, right? They're going to be able to say, you don't have expertise in this area. I think we have to pull back the veil a little further and we have to ask for proof of their claims. I think that needs to be number one. And I think a really good example of that is the statement that in one form or another, the industry always promotes, which is to say, every single modern advancement in medicine has relied on or depended on animals. Okay, we've needed them for all of it. And the suggestion there is that like we couldn't have done it or that's how makes it right. What we find when we peel that back, and this actually came out in a really interesting paper by a physicist named Robert A.J. Matthews, and he was like, what's the origin of this statement? And when you go back, you find that it was a sentence in a one-pager that was released by the US Public Health Service in 1994 without any citations. They just said every modern breakthrough has relied on animals. And it has been cited thereon hundreds, if not thousands of times for the proposition that animals were absolutely necessary for these advancements. And that is not the case. That can't be quantified or validated in any way. And I think we need to start to question the idea that because they have been used, which they have been because the law has mandated it, the question of if they have been used versus were they necessary to be used? Could we not have arrived where we are without them? And what could we have achieved if we hadn't utilized them? There are also not great answers for that, but we are going to find them as we continue to develop non-animal methods, like we talked about, as we continue to develop organoids and these other microphysiological systems that show us, oh my God, they're like way more predictive for us. They're allowing us to answer questions more quickly. And so I think the first part of the message is to start fundamentally, which is to say, if you're going to come at me with science, and as we said, it's going to be technical and it's going to sound really impressive, let's just boil it down though, and let's see some data. Like, where do these claims come from? And can you give me more than isolated cases of success? Because we often get accused on our end of not being able to focus on, like, we're just pulling like things that happened that went badly. But they do the very same thing. They just want to focus on isolated incidents in which animals were predictive for their cause. The last thing I would say, which I think is really powerful and as a non-scientist has shaped some of how I think about this, came from Dr. Pandora Pound, who wrote The Rat Trap just recently, and she was a lifelong scientist. And she made the suggestion that those of us opposing animal research are often and almost always on stronger scientific ground than the animal researchers, even if we're not science-based or scientists. And her claim around this was to say that when we look at why animals do not translate, or animal research doesn't translate to humans, they shouldn't and can't stand in for us. It's based on principles of evolution, one of the most accepted and unifying theories that exists. And it gives us a way to connect all of the failures that we point to. Like, it doesn't work in all of these cases. Why doesn't it work? It doesn't work because all species are unique. It doesn't work because there isn't a hierarchy of animals. There aren't higher order and lower order animals. We're all equally like unique in that sense. What animal researchers point to is not that in evolutionary theory. It's just the idea that we have a common ancestor, right? But they reject implicitly the idea that we're all unique, and they institute a hierarchy of value or complexity that doesn't exist. And so her argument was, we actually have a unifying theory to explain their failures. They do not have a unifying theory to explain their successes. And then that in itself renders what they're saying scientifically vulnerable to an unbelievable degree.
That is so interesting. I don't think I could pull off that argument myself, but it's a really good one. And it's not, I mean, it's sciencey, but it's not that sciencey.
Yeah.
That that's a very compelling argument. What I usually say in these situations is that if we had decided hundreds of years ago, as we should have, that it was wrong to do this to our fellow creatures, and a lot of people did. I mean, certainly vivisection, the anti-vivisection movement was really the start of the modern animal rights movement. But anyway, if we decided that, we wouldn't have then had no science or medicine. I mean, we wouldn't have just said, oh, well, we'll all just die of everything. I mean, we would have done something else. And I guess some people would say that this was a necessary step in building knowledge, but regardless of whether it was, either we can give it up, it was necessary, we can give it up, or it was never necessary at all. We would have a different kind of medicine, which definitely could be better.
Yeah, you also just made me think about the early anti-vivisectionists. And if anyone listening or watching this does not know what I'm referring to, just Google early anti-vivisectionists, because what you will see is like a group of badass women.
Very badass. Terrifying. I wouldn't have wanted them coming after me, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Wow, there's so much here. And so my wife works in human research protection, and many in her field work in animal research. She does not. That was, that was something that was obviously a no-go for her, a vegan of 30-something years. But it is common for people to ask her peers. This is a question I struggle asking, but I know that people do ask her peers, are there any areas in which animal research is producing or might produce, quote unquote, good research that could not be produced by any other means? So how would you respond to that?
I think that's a great question. And I think, again, it's the framing. We don't know, potentially. Maybe there are some insights specific to that species, which you could not gather in any other way. But I think the suggestion that we need to use other species to gain insight into humans or into another living being, this to me seems like a very challenging proposition to make, in the sense that we are all different and we are all unique. I think that it's impossible for us to suggest that no knowledge has been gained from animals, or that nothing that has been learned from animal research translated into a human benefit. And that's not our assertion either. I think what we are saying, as we've discussed, right, is one, it's unethical, full stop. But two, as Mariann was saying, because we've done it this way, doesn't mean we need to continue doing it this way. And one of the large opportunity costs of continuing to focus on a practice that we know has failed so significantly, both ethically and scientifically, is what are we missing out on that we're not doing? As we continue to fund animal research, we are not funding other human relevant initiatives. We are not funding other more creative ways to bring science into the 21st century. And so I think it's less a question about could we never achieve what we've done with animal research without it, and more, what are we not achieving because we're using animal research? And why do we think that the best we can do is to torture and kill other living things, supposedly in the name of creating prosperity and life? This to me just is a non-starter.
Well, and of course, historically, prisoners have been subjected to unethical medical experiments against their will or without informed consent, including right here in the US during the mid-20th century, which wasn't that long ago. So maybe there's some information coming out of it, but it doesn't make it ethical. And as a species, we have to be trying to be ethical, at least. I mean, I guess that's like the crux of everything we're talking about here. I digress.
And as the guy from the NIH, I forget who it was, NIH said, God doesn't want us to do this.
Yeah, the FDA. Yep, Dr. Marty Makary. Yep.
Why can't religions say that? Like, so crazy. That's such a crazy line. I'm surprised I didn't know about that. All right. We don't have that much time, and there's stuff we have to get into, because I want to talk about transparency, and I want to talk about ARLO and how difficult it is to get information, what ARLO is, and how it can help activists get the information they need.
Thank you. Yes. So we really think, secrecy is really central, I think, to the animal research industry. And it goes in the same vein as, like we said, the more people know, the more they oppose it. And it always reminds me of that really famous quote, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, everyone would be vegetarian. And of course, I would sub vegan for that, but be it as it may. We think the same thing is true of animal labs. If there were glass walls and you could see what's happening inside, there would be vast and like visceral opposition. And the industry knows this. As Jasmin was alluding to, historically, vivisection took place much more openly, right? It would be like almost a form of entertainment in some spheres. It would happen in common squares or in really large auditoriums at universities. And what this engendered was like abhorrence from folks, not only those who were the intended audience, but from those who learned of this practice. And it mounted this movement against it. And I think what that taught researchers was we need to pull back and we only want to share what we think is going to play well. And we're going to be really careful and gatekeep over who can see what we're doing. And that exists today. So today, this practice is taking place behind walls, right, in locked laboratories where they're not allowing any outsiders in. It's behind scientific jargon. Like you said, Mariann, that's really hard for those of us who don't have a science background to like parse through what's happening and to even find the animals sometimes in the research. They're reduced to numbers or models or, other things. And then they also are hiding behind legal loopholes. So even in a country where like the US, where we're really lucky to have federal and state public records laws, there's ways for them to get around it, right? For them to kind of be obstinate and make it really difficult for us to access information. And indeed, the NIH has actually on webinars advised researchers to really put the minimal amount in these records, right? Don't put anything extraneous, don't give them any additional information. And so we're left with a really non-transparent industry. And we know that the antidote for that is to like create transparency. And so part of the way we've tried to do that is by creating something called ARLO, which is the Animal Research Laboratory Overview. And Rise for Animals put this together in 2020. It is like a first of its kind transparency tool and public database that profiles not only animal labs, but others within the space, including animal breeders. So Ridgeland would have a dual profile, for instance. And it houses over 40,000 records. These are records not only that are available through public inspections, so for the government, like inspection reports by the USDA, but it also includes lots of records that the industry really doesn't want us to see, and we had to request specifically. So photographs, internal correspondence between folks at these institutions and federal regulators. And we update it all the time. So we're constantly adding more information. And what this allows folks to do, I think, is to get an understanding of what's happening broadly in the industry and also to drill down on what's happening locally. Like if you're interested in a particular lab or particular species, it gives you a place to start to look. And I think as someone who puts a lot of these records, reviews them, and enters them, I think one of the most powerful pieces is that it pushes back on the narrative from the industry that these grotesque instances that we actually see get media attention are one-offs. They're isolated incidents. Things just went badly. When you see a collection of thousands of records and you see the records written by the institutions themselves, by the government regulators, in their own words, you start to realize that this industry is just premised on violence. It is just premised on suffering. This isn't isolated. This isn't an aberration. This is what it is in their own words. And I think that that is a really powerful message for people to get. And we hope that ARLO will be empowering to folks, because our opinion that if secrecy is the industry's greatest weapon, then exposing the truth has to be one of our greatest strengths.